Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Every American is born with inherent rights. That's what our founding documents say, and the purpose of the U.S. government is to protect those rights. That has been our national creed for hundreds of years, and it's worked. But the left no longer believes it. Progressives have decided that the Bill of Rights applies only to people who agree with them. Their views are protected by the First Amendment. Your views are hate speech. The Second Amendment covers their security detail. You can't be trusted to have a gun at home. Now the activist left is telling us that people who disagree with them no longer have freedom of movement or association. They can't go to the movies or go to restaurants. If they dare leave their homes, they will be surrounded by mobs and threatened. It's happening. Last Friday, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders and her family were forced to leave a restaurant in Virginia because the owner didn't like their politics. Sanders and her husband went home, but the rest of their family went to another restaurant. That wasn't good enough. They had committed the sin of being related to someone who works at the White House. So progressives continued to harangue them as they tried to eat. This is happening in a lot of places to a lot of people. Protesters, for example, have massed outside the home of White House aide Stephen Miller. In case their intentions weren't clear enough, they put up mock wanted posters with Miller's face on them. A DHS employee, meanwhile, found a burned, decapitated animal carcass on his front porch. Again, the message is crystal clear. Activists on the left are moving toward violence. They are aware of this, and some applaud it. A piece yesterday in Splinter News, which is owned by Univision, explained that intimidating Trump supporters in public places is, quote, just the minimum baseline here. This is all going to get more extreme, and it should, end quote. How extreme? Well, the article fondly recalls the domestic terror bombings of the 1970s. Thousands a year in America. That's our future, the article says. Unfortunately, we're headed there fast. Over the weekend in Los Angeles, Congresswoman Maxine Waters urged the mob to hunt down and find members of the president's cabinet. Here's part of it.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet. Already, you have members of your cabinet that are being booed out of restaurants, who have protesters taking up at their house, who's saying no peace, no sleep. No peace, no sleep. Let's stay the course. Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Maxine Waters isn't just any member of Congress. The Daily Beast calls her, quote, a folk hero. BuzzFeed describes her as the unchallenged new face of the Democratic Party. And indeed she is. She's also a self-described civil rights leader, which makes it a little weird to see her demanding that certain people be denied public accommodations. Sorry, we don't serve your kind at the lunch counter. That's exactly what she is saying. And she said it again yesterday.
I stand by my speech in saying that the protests have already started. They're probably going to continue.
The message of all this is clear. The left no longer considers its political opponents fellow citizens or even human. How long before they start openly calling for something bad to happen to those opponents? Well, in the case of Maxine Waters, it won't be the first time. In 1992, Waters cheered as racist mobs burned Los Angeles. As she put it at the time, riot is the voice of the unheard. When Reginald Denny was dragged from his truck and nearly murdered for the color of his skin, beaten in the head with a cinder block on camera, Waters championed his attackers. She partied with them after their trial. Maxine Waters has a record of endorsing mob violence. Everyone in Washington knows that. Democrats don't care. To his credit, Chuck Schumer did call Waters' most recent remarks, quote, not American. Good for him. But hardly anyone else said anything. Nancy Pelosi blamed Donald Trump for what Waters said. That was a theme. Stop hitting me, they said as they threw the first punch.
I feel that we are in pre-Nazi Germany. The stages of things that are occurring on a daily basis, the obfuscation, the lies, the totalitarian behavior is shocking and horrendous. Yeah. And we have to be vigilant.
They follow the exact pattern that Hitler has. He is evil. He is evil. And the thing is, I thought, oh, he'll come in and he won't really know because he's not that smart. He doesn't, he'll just do a showmanship thing. But he's evil.
This is about racism. This is pure and simple racism. That's all this is. The people who support him are frightened to death of this country becoming the Browning of America.
Something interesting has happened. As progressives become more authoritarian and less tolerant, they seem more convinced that they're fighting actual Nazis rather than their fellow Americans with whom, in the scheme of things, they have only relatively mild political differences. The more they accuse the administration of extremism, the more extreme they become. And that's not surprising, because once you decide that the people who disagree with you are Nazis, everything is allowed. Why wouldn't you threaten them in restaurants or burn their houses down, or who knows? This could very well end in tragedy. You start talking like this and you don't know where it's going to go. Some progressives seem to welcome all that. Quentin James, who's the head of a political action committee that supports Democrats, recently announced that those calling for calm are, quote, accomplices of the current administration. Accomplices? This is the language of total war. It's scary. It has no place in politics. We're heading towards something awful. And the only people who can stop it are the adults on the left. And there are still some. Democratic members of Congress, entertainment figures, religious leaders, media chieftains like Jeff Zucker at CNN or Andy Lack at NBC. They're silent now, cowering and complicit in all of this, but the country badly needs them to cool the rhetoric and rein in the mob. No more Nazi talk on their TV channels. No more screaming at people in restaurants. There's a point of no return, and we are approaching it, and we need their help to pull back. Peter Kirsanow is on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and he joins us tonight. Peter, thank you for coming on.
Good to be back.
Given everything you've seen, what would happen if the people who are encouraging mob intimidation and extremism, and they are encouraging it openly, what would happen if they took the reins of actual power in this country?
You know, there's been maybe 2 instances in the history of the United States where this kind of activity has been replicated, and I would think that one of them might be the Reconstruction era, where you had a resistance in the South resisting the results of the Civil War and the reunification of the country.
Right.
And you had public officials exhorting private citizens to deprive other private citizens of their rights to public accommodations, to privileges and immunities that are secured to all citizens and were secured by the Civil War. That has only happened once before in our history, where public officials are actually exhorting private citizens. In that case, the private citizens they were exhorting were the Klan, who was the military ring at the time essentially of the Southern Democrats, to deprive blacks of their rights under the law and also deprive them of public accommodations. You might say that Jim Crow era, but you might have a singular governor of a southern state who might stand in a schoolhouse door, but they weren't actually exhorting private citizens that much to do so, although that did occur. But now we have this, and it's extraordinary because I think we're at this inflection point for a host of reasons, but the framers gave us a Republican system of governance to shield us against mob violence and the passions of the day. But that depended really on 2 things, and that is an informed electorate, informed citizenry, and responsible elected officials. As to the former, we have now an extremely biased media that doesn't really inform but proselytizes and harangues and acts as an organ for one particular side to get their viewpoint out. And our educational system hasn't been teaching effective history for 30 years now. And with respect to responsible elected officials, if you think back to, the last 50 years or so, it's difficult to imagine, or go back throughout our history, it's difficult to imagine any of the founding fathers, a Madison, a Jefferson, a Lincoln, a Roosevelt, an Eisenhower, Reagan, doing the kind of inflaming of the electorate the way we see some elected officials doing. But even aside from that, not inflaming it, but not even trying to tamp down the passions and the rhetoric that the founders understood were anathema to an effectively governed republic.
This is an inflection point. You're exactly right, and you put it in the perfect perspective. Thank you very much. Peter Kirsanow, it's always great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Robert Patillo is an attorney and an activist, and he joins us tonight. Robert, thank you for coming on. So
Thanks, Tucker.
Progressive activists have a right to intimidate and scream at people they disagree with politically in public places, in restaurants, for example, or outside their homes, What are the boundaries of that? I mean, do you have a right to show up at someone's kid's soccer game and scream at the parents? Do you have a right to show up at the person's church, at their parents' funeral? I mean, what are the boundaries now in this new activism on the left?
Well, Tucker, one thing that I think is important, you started off this segment by talking about the First Amendment rights and freedom of speech. What Maxine Waters said to her supporters was to exercise your freedom of speech. If you see somebody who is in power, confront them, speak to them about the issues. We're in a swamp territory in D.C. right now where individuals only listen to lobbyists and to special interest groups. If the only time you get to speak to elected officials is when they're in public, then by all means, don't commit violence, don't commit anything that will harm the individual, but let them know how you feel. People have the right to exercise their First Amendment rights.
And I'm actually, it's a little stunning for me to take a lecture about the First Amendment from anyone on the left who've been working overtime for the past couple of years to curtail our First Amendment rights, who invented this fake category of hate speech, etc. But leaving that aside, this is not a debate about anyone's right to speak. It's a debate about whether it's appropriate to scream at people in public and to force them out of, for example, restaurants. This is not an attempt to win them over or to show them another side of the issue. It's an effort to intimidate them. You can't read it any other way. You're not telling me they were trying to inform Sarah Huckabee Sanders. They were punishing her.
Look, Tucker, the entire point is that because the members of the administration don't talk to the American people, they don't have regular press briefings, they don't go out and have town hall meetings, this is the only time the individuals have the opportunity to speak with them.
What do you mean? Trump just preempted our show yesterday. Wait, hold on. Come on.
There's a difference between a
yesterday, the president,
and a town hall.
But you said they don't give press briefing. Look, we hear a lot from the administration. We hear a lot from its opponents. I welcome that almost uniquely on television. I like debates. I'm glad that you are here. We disagree. I think we should have a conversation. You do not have the right to scream at me in front of my children in a restaurant. Surround my house on the weekend when my kids are home. Come to my church. Go to their soccer games. Go to my parents' funerals. Do you see the difference between having a debate over the issues and intimidating people in the public space?
Well, let's understand that the entirety of this issue started with a lack of messaging on the part of the administration, by not explaining what the detention policy is, by not explaining what exactly is happening to these children. If the president and the administration want to have a conversation about this, do like other administrations have done. Go do town halls around the country, speak to voters, let the people express their feelings to the administration. Understand what public opinion is. Don't simply hide behind the walls of power. And nobody's going to people's soccer games or funerals or
it's not my job.
They're saying confront these people in public.
Well, those are public spaces, and I guess the point I'm making is once you start describing people you disagree with politically as Nazis, as the worst category of almost non-human beings, you are almost by definition encouraging, first of all, you're closing out any possibility of agreement or compromise, and you're basically saying, hurt them. I mean, what do you do to, honestly, I'm being sincere with you, what do you do to a Nazi? If you really thought Nazis were taking over the country, you know what I would do? I would consider force. I don't want to be governed by Nazis. So that's why we don't talk that way, because it, by its definition, encourages violence, right?
But no, Tucker, let's understand that during the Obama administration, he was accused of being everything from a Muslim sleeper cell to not an American citizen. This is what happens. Joe Walsh yelled out, "You lie," during a presidential address. The discourse that we have in this nation has become caustic. Somebody has to fix the issue. But right now, when you have an administration that refuses to speak to the American people, it's difficult to get in there.
Okay, again, it's not my job to flack for the White House. But holy smokes, he just did an hour-long live event yesterday. He's doing an hour-long live event tomorrow. I mean, they speak a lot. That's not really the issue. The issue is whether you have a right to take political differences and turn them into some kind of mob retaliation against the people you disagree with. Can we just agree on this? Maybe the left should stop calling people Nazis. Maybe that's too far. Maybe that is setting the table for something awful. Can we agree on that? Or is it okay to liken people to Adolf Hitler? I mean, for real.
Look, Tucker, we can agree on that, but can also the right not support the Charlottesville actual Nazis who are walking around with swastikas? That's what FOMET says. You have to condemn those Nazis.
I mean, I've never met anybody who would support it. Okay, look, I've never met anybody.
I agree with that.
Okay, but it's one thing to say of someone who is espousing, I guess, Nazi views, you're a Nazi. But to say about someone who disagrees with you on immigration policy, you're a Nazi, what you're saying is, I don't need to win you over, debate you. What I need to do is destroy you. And that's what the left is saying, isn't it?
I think what happens is that when you do not condemn, we do not condemn people like David Duke, we do not condemn the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, then you get your issues conflated with them. Well, as I said, there's a difference between doing an hour-long speech to people and having a town hall where you speak with people and get their input, get their side of the conversation, and present public policy that helps all people.
Yeah, okay. Robert, thank you. Fox senior political analyst Brit Hume joins us tonight. Brit, I don't want to be hysterical or read too much into this, but it does seem like we've moved, and you have more perspective than I, to a place where there's no possibility of compromise, where one side sees the other really as something that must be destroyed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Tucker. Consider this. When Maxine Waters next rises on the House floor, she will be recognized by the presiding officer as the gentle lady from California. Now, there may not be that many people right now who think she's either gentle or a lady, but that is the custom of the House. Members address each other as ladies and gentlemen. In the Senate, members are discouraged from ever addressing each other directly on the Senate floor. They are to speak to the presiding officer, calling him Mr. President. If they want to mention a fellow member, they will often refer to him as something like, I disagree with the distinguished senator from wherever. There's a reason for these customs, and they are this: that political debates can become heated, they become quickly personal, and they can devolve into the kind of brutal and bitter name-calling that we've seen lately, in which the most extraordinarily harsh things are said about one another, and that in turn can lead to violence. Consider this. In 1856, as most people who've studied American history know, a senator from Massachusetts named Charles Sumner was caned nearly to death on the Senate floor by a Southern member from South Carolina who disagreed with him on the issue that divided us so deeply then, and that, of course, was slavery. We are seeing and hearing some of the same kinds of harsh rhetoric today that we heard in that era, and it is dangerous. It is dangerous, as Steve Scalise can tell you. Certainly Charles Sumner's relatives can tell you that as well. This is the reason why these institutions recognize that this kind of talk and behavior has consequences, and they can be quite severe.
Wouldn't it be helpful if the adults on the left stood up and said that? Look, you don't have to like Trump, and we disagree with him on the issues. I get it. But you can't call people Nazis anymore. Maybe the people at the other channels should say, you can't call people Nazis on our air. Like, you can't, that's too far. Why is nobody saying anything like that on the left?
Well, let me suggest something here, Tucker. The president certainly deserves his share of the responsibility for this, because he has tossed about the harshest kind of language toward his critics. It seems that no slight is too small for him not to have a nuclear reaction over, and he says the strongest things. But there's a cycle here. The president will say or tweet something that is characteristically not terribly precise and very often exaggerated. His critics will respond to it by taking the worst possible, most extreme interpretation of what he has said, and they will react to it accordingly. And the spiral then begins. And pretty soon, you know, you're hearing him accused. Consider this over the weekend, Tucker. The president mused about how we shouldn't have to go through a laborious and time-consuming legal process to keep illegal border crossers from getting into this country. And he was immediately accused of being authoritarian and of trying to eliminate people's due process. Well, and the fact of the matter is that what he described is precisely the way that many countries deal with illegal border crossers, and the way some of them are dealt with by this country now. But that was lost on countless critics. I mean, the Washington Post, in a front-page news story, described that as an attack on the judicial system. This is where we go with this, and it is. And once you start this sort of stuff, this sort of exaggerated reaction, it spirals and can spiral out of control, which is what I think you are worried about, and what I know I certainly am worried about. We need in America, as we argue with each other, to keep a civil tongue.
I agree with that. It's getting too confronting people in public. It's too much.
Unbelievable.
Brit, thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.